welcome back. Rob here from Black Label Minis with a new tutorial this week on Star Wars Legion's Dewback Rider expansion. So after some quick assembly and a primer, let's go ahead and get started. One of the things I wanted to achieve here was the difference between the color of the scales on the top and the bottom, and also the skin color. To best simulate that, I decided some dry brushing was in order. The first step is not as much of a dry brush as it is just a color step, but the larger dry brush really helps speed this up. After giving the dark green a couple minutes to dry, grab a slightly lighter green. Nothing too bright here. We want to keep the contrast level as muted as possible. So I'm going to be using a reflective green from Vallejo. You'll want to be slightly easier or more deliberate with your brush steps on this compared to the last. Again, on this step, we want to keep the contrast here to be slightly muted and not stand out as much, so only mix a small amount of beige into your reflective green. Also, taking your time and targeting the raised areas of the head, neck, and legs while doing your best to leave the lower areas in the previous color. If your model looks super stark or contrasty here, don't worry too much. The next step will help with that. So here to help with the contrast or stark look of the beige, go ahead and grab your favorite dark green shade. I'm personally going to be using Athonian Camoshade from Citadel. You could use this straight from the pot if you wanted to, but I suggest thinning it with a medium to help slow down the drying process and to help focus on the areas that really need it. Now after that dries about 15-20 minutes or so. If your green beige mix was too bright in the previous steps, go ahead and take a moment and darken it a little bit. Now let's go ahead and go back all over those same areas, this time using a smaller brush and really making sure to hit just the raised areas. For the leather harness and reins, I wanted to have a nice dark leather color. Now the Vallejo model color leather brown is just about right for me. Make sure you go ahead and remove the head to cover that entire area right there for best effect. So I wanted to really make sure that the shadows on the skin popped out really well. So I'm going to take the original dark green, add a little black. I'm going to grab a small brush with a decent tip, and I'm going to really thin this paint out. Now remember, when I say thin, use thin paints. That doesn't always mean really watered down paints as much as it just means you have a thin layer of paint on your wet palette that you're using. So I'm going to go around the model, working in these areas. I'm going to especially focus on the tail and the legs where they meet the body, and I'm also going to be working on the face around his eyes and nose. For the feet, his skin has a lot of detail, so for these I decided to go ahead and use some straight beige to help them stand out a little bit more. Again, I'm going to be using a small brush with a good tip so not to mess up that area too much. So after adding this beige, we're going to want to tone it down a little bit. So let's go ahead and grab the Athonian Camoshade again. This time I'm just going straight from the pot for the best effect here. To start working on the saddle, I'll be using Saddle Brown from Vallejo model line. When you're doing this, don't forget about that little hand rest area right in front of the trooper. The saddle blanket was done using a heavy brown. There are a lot of little small areas in there, so remember to take your time and find them all. To make sure that the saddlebags and the sleeping row received a nice consistent color, I'm going to go ahead and go over them first with a heavy khaki. You can use pretty much any mid-range tan to brown color you want here. I was just looking for the speed of the heavier pigmented color. Now for the primary color here, the saddlebags are going to be done in a bright leather brown. This one coming from Vallejo's game line. While the sleeping row will be done in khaki, and then the straps that hold it to the saddle done in the same leather brown as the bags. To shade this area, we want to use a more earth-friendly color, such as Agrex Earth Shade from Citadel. Just make sure to take your time and keep the shade where it belongs. We don't want it falling down onto our dewback. After this dries up, I'm going to come back with the same colors to clean up and add some minor highlighting. I will also use the brighter leather color to add some depth to the harnesses and reins by adding some little scratch marks here and there. I also decided that I needed to color his nails, so to do that I'm going to be using khaki from the game line, and then I will come back with some off-white to add a little bit of depth and contrast. Onto the troopers and back to dry brushing. I went ahead and I based these in a Vallejo model white gray, as the white primer was just slightly too bright for me. Now I'm going to be using the same off-white that I just used on the nails. I'm going to go ahead and grab my smaller brush, and I'm going to make sure that I leave all the recesses in the base while working on the helmet, chest plates, and arms. For his legs, I went ahead and covered this area in some silly putty. Silly putty is really good as it doesn't tend to pick up the paint that it's sitting on top of like poster tack does. Now some areas here may be harder to reach for some parts, so just grab a brush that you don't like and continue dry brushing. Now finish off the armor, grab some ivory. You really do not want to use white here. You're going to want to use ivory or a similar color. For the legs, just lightly brush the highest areas. On the torso and the head areas, aim for the upper chest plate, the top of the helmet, and the face portion. On the arms, we're just going to focus on the upward facing spots. Now the shoulder pads, backpack, and weapons were based in black. I used orange and yellow for the pauldrons, while the backpack was done using off-white, red, blue, and silver, and then Nona oil to knock the silver down a little bit. The weapons were dry brushed using silver, and then washed with Nona oil to help tone them down. So after final assembling and mounting the Dewback Rider from Fantasy Flight Games for Star Wars Legion. Remember, if you like these videos and want to see more, to like and subscribe for notifications. Also, if you're able to, please consider contributing via Patreon or PayPal, links below. And as always, thank you for watching, and if nothing else, paint something.